Welcome to the OLC group that is hopefully going to be attending the OLC Innovate conference coming up in April. I'm really excited today to have one of the keynote speakers with us to talk about the keynote. This is a subject that's kind of very near and dear to my heart. And so what I want to do is introduce Darlene Cavalier. And, just to give you a little bit of a background, I mean, she's been very much involved in the SciStarter and in kind of citizen science projects. And I think is probably one of the leaders in the United States, kind of with these citizen science initiatives. And so, I'm very, very excited to have her kind of come as being a scientist, or at least being an ex-scientist. This stuff is near and dear to me. So what I'd like to do is at least introduce you to Darlene, and who you can probably see. Wave, see? And, and then what we're also going to do today, which is a little bit different, we also have the other keynote speaker who will be doing a video blog a little bit later on. And it's what we've done is we've had each of the keynotes kind of take the opportunity to ask a question of the other speakers on or the other keynotes. So we're gonna ask Darlene, and maybe we should start off with that just to kind of help kick it off, and then maybe you can kind of go into talking about what it is you're going to be talking about, and about the master class, and about the workshops that you plan, because again, I think it's very exciting. And so really what John Kao, who's the other keynote speaker, said, he said, here's his question. He says, much has been made of STEM education. Now there is STEAM with an A for arts, and STEAMY with an I for innovation. What in your opinion should STEM students know about creativity, innovation, design, and entrepreneurship, and why? So maybe we can start off with that, and I'd be happy to repeat the question if you need it, because it's long. But why don't we go from there?
I've got it burned into my mind, because I've think about this a lot. And when I first saw the question on email, I thought, oh gosh, that seems like something I'm not very qualified to answer. But then I started thinking about so many of the different aspects of citizen science. It's very, very broad. It's as broad as science and technology. So when you think about STEAM, art and innovation in particular, in science and technology, where we see that play out, both in formal and in informal learning environments, we see things like how to visualize data from these projects. A big motivator or incentive for people to get involved in these projects is to understand, and I'll go into what citizen science is, but basically people who are submitting data or analyzing data for a research project, not understanding what the data means in context to other things is a problem. It's a problem in general, but it's certainly a problem for people who are not trained in science. So we see really amazing examples of the data being visualized in a way that contextualizes this for them, or makes it fun or important for them to be able to kind of play around with the data. If we see XYZ types of microbes in abundance in Philadelphia, what does that mean? What does that say about the increase in flu symptoms that we're seeing here? So who wants to deal with Excel databases and so forth to be able to figure out those correlations, or just even investigate those correlations? But the blending of good visual dynamics, good visual interpretations. I have seen some really interesting art in that regard. I would consider that art in some ways. The other would be with innovation and being an entrepreneur. Where I'm starting to see really exciting movement has to do with the instruments that are used to collect or analyze the data. So what used to be a barrier, lack of access to some of the sensors and lab equipment for amateurs, quote unquote, to be involved in these projects. We're starting to see low-cost instruments come into play, and those low-cost instruments sometimes are developed by makers or the open hardware movement, some of whom you'll meet at the conference in Public Lab. Universities are training students on how to use good human interface designs to start thinking about how to develop instruments that used to only be used by professional researchers. Sorry. I'm a little bit earlier out here in Arizona. I'll give you that. I should still be awake, and I have not had enough coffee yet. But this also, we're starting to see those makers step into becoming manufacturers, figuring out how to start to live like amateurs, live like entrepreneurs, and create sustainable ways to put their tools into the hands of people who need them, and to start to look at kind of market-driven approaches for that as well. So even there with the development of the instruments, we had an interesting summit recently at Arizona State University, which is where I am now. I'm a professor of practice in their School for the Future of Innovation in Society. So we spent a lot of time looking at lots of barriers and opportunities through the whole life cycle, basically, of public engagement in science and technology. This ranges from helping communities articulate concerns that they might have that can be addressed through research questions, to the citizen science part of it. So this is gathering data, analyzing data, developing some of the instruments used for those processes, and then even towards connecting that to science policy outcomes. So this whole life cycle, we spent a lot of time evaluating here and developing new protocols for, or best practices, sharing best practices. So at this summit, we had makers and citizen scientists come together to share some of these best practices. This is where we started to really see artists and people who design for the developing world, and people who use empathy in engineering, think more creatively about how to work together to share data, as I mentioned before in the first part of my answer here, and develop, co-create tools that are appropriate to the context and appropriate to the really the culture that would be adopting those tools for these projects.
So Darlene, you talked about a lot of different types of honorable work that you can do within STEM to STEAM to STEAMY, many of which are going to be articulated at the conference. Just off the top of my head, I think about the innovation labs and how, you know, there is a dedicated maker space area and room to design think through different challenges and ideas. But I also really would love for you to talk a little bit about the other special opportunities that you are going to be making available with your participation in the conference beyond the keynote, so the masterclass that you're helping to lead, and also the workshop that's kicking off the beginning of the conference. Can you talk a little bit about those, and maybe talk a little bit about citizen science, particularly for those folks who are not familiar with that term and who are coming into this completely brand new?
Absolutely, yes. And I would encourage everybody to try to come to the keynote and the workshop and the masterclass, because you'll really get kind of an end-to-end, full service snapshot of all the ways that you can, as an individual, get involved in citizen science if there's a personal interest of yours to get involved in some of these projects, and or find ways to integrate these in formal and informal settings as well. So the keynote will give a pretty, I wouldn't even say detailed, a pretty good overview of citizen science. It's a very broad landscape. This landscape keeps shifting. Even in the time that I've been involved in it, the landscape has shifted dramatically. It really was easy to articulate or define citizen science. You know, several years ago, when it was defined as the birdwatching community, or the amateur astronomers, or the people who go and monitor water quality. Those were the three, and I would.
Those are the three. That's it.
Those are the three. That's what people would identify with. Like, oh, okay, I get it. That's the citizen science. But now, you know, it's moving quickly into health and medicine. So you have self-tracking stuff that people are already doing. It just wasn't classified as citizen science, but tying that into research projects, seeing how that can have implications, mashing up of data, as I mentioned before. Well, what does it mean if you're reporting asthma symptoms on your bike route, and that's mapped up to bike paths, and that feedback is warning you about the best bike path you might want to take based on, you know, aggregated data from others and trends that people are seeing. Looking at how to take flu symptoms. So this is a project called Flu Near You, asking people to kind of keep regular surveys and share information of flu symptoms or no flu symptoms. And that all goes into a database that's open and that's shared and that's populated with others, starting to look at flu trends and see if you can start to predict outbreaks of particular flu outbreaks geographically. And again, looking at correlative material from there. So online projects that use big data and ask people to start to take small steps. So their small data goes and helps analyze things like research for Alzheimer's. This is a great project that we'll showcase down there called Eyes on ALZ. So it's a project that mashes up a couple of different big citizen science platforms using existing technology platforms from Stardust at Home. So this is where it starts to sound a little complicated, but it's really not. Stardust at Home was a project, or is a very popular project, that basically uses your computer as a microscope. And it asks people to look at very, very, very small bits of stardust. It's actual stardust. This was collected through basically aerogels, so sticky gels that were placed on a satellite and retrieved, and it picked up actual stardust. It's very difficult for one person or even a small group of professionals to sift through these millions and millions and millions of microscopic images. So that project gives very specific instructions of, here's what we're asking you to look for. That basic platform was merged with another one that is, the person who runs that project can very articulately describe it in a way that's much better than I'm doing right now, but the other project platform is called iWire, and iWire looks at the neural pathway. Basically, it has images that show you a neural pathway, and it asks the user or the participant to look for very specific things. You color in different objects, and it starts to build towards modeling of neural images. What happens is these two platforms, Pietro Michelucci, who's the principal investigator of this project called Eyes on ALZ, worked hard and tirelessly to put those two together. And what he's come up with, and his colleagues at Cornell, is a way to start looking at where blood vessels are starting to get clogged. So lots and lots of data. You look at these videos and you are directed in a way that allows you to signal where you think you see a clogged vessel. And how that relates to ALZ is they're looking at areas that indicate that there's some pressure from the external part of these vessels, creating these clogs, which may be leading to Alzheimer's in people. That's an example of so much data that's out there. You do not need a science degree to look. You need an interest, and you need to be able to focus for a couple of minutes on a training video that shows you how to do this. That information is so important to those researchers. It also kind of feeds into something that we're doing at SciStarter, which is enabling people who are involved in these projects to keep track of all their different contributions across different platforms and be validated for the work that they're doing. We found in some of our research at SciStarter that people are typically involved in 3 to 5 projects, which is great. But some of the frustrations they would experience would be things like not hearing from the project owner. So they would kind of quit that project and move on to another one. Not knowing if their data or their contributions were being used by a project. And also just forgetting that they were, because of those two things primarily, forgetting that they had been involved in a project, and how frustrating it is for us. Have you ever picked up a book and halfway through it you realize you already read it? Well, some things happen like that for people who get involved in projects where they think, oh, that looks like a great one. I love XYZ. I love fireflies, whatever the project might be. Starting to get involved and then recall that, wait a minute, I already signed up for this project. I'm very frustrated. I don't even know what happened, the first time I was involved in this project. At the very least, on our end, we're able to let them know that they've already joined that project, or they bookmarked that project, or they actually did that project. In the case of Pietro's project, he uses a snippet that allows people to automatically track their contributions in a centralized portfolio on SciStarter. So this is good for a researcher like Pietro, because he can get a very good sense of all the different types of projects his community is also involved in. And so we start to look at new research questions that might emerge from that type of information. If more than half of Pietro's participants also happen to be involved in outdoor nature projects, for example, he might start looking for correlations there too, or how to start to maximize and leverage the goodwill and the energy of these participants to look for other sources of data as well. So those are some of the things that we'll get into when I say we, I mean me, myself, and I during the keynote. All three of us are going to give an overview of a little bit of the history of citizen science, the broad scale landscape, how it's changing in these different fields. That was one platform and one research discipline that I just talked about there. Moving into health, mashing up of existing technologies. There's a whole issue of all the instruments that I mentioned before. That's a big barrier for people. They'll see a project and they won't want to do it because it requires them to have some sensor that they don't have laying around the house, or something as simple as a rain gauge that they don't have around the house. But what we're starting to look at is, well, how can we help people identify instruments that they do have laying around the house and those that they would be willing to loan to other people or borrow from a public library or a university, tools that they may be able to make through groups like Public Lab or the maker community. We might just be able to publish the instructions for making low-cost tools. And then also going back to the idea of sustainability and that entrepreneurial spirit, tools that we might just be able to sell through SciStarter. You find a project, and in one experience, you can join that project and get everything you need from that project as well. That doesn't mean that you do the project on SciStarter. We still want to leave that very independent and allow the researcher and the project owner to own that, or the community that came up with that project to really own that and start to develop a community there. There's a lot of ways that SciStarter is serving as basically ligaments to this whole landscape. And it's not a perfect system yet, but I will give, in the process of describing some of those ligaments, it gives a good indication of areas that have been addressed as potential gaps or barriers to a volunteer's experience through this life cycle. And there's so many still that have yet to be discovered, partly because of the fact this field changes so quickly, which is why I love being part of it. It's never boring. I can put it that way. It's not always, it's very exciting for all of us involved at SciStarter and all of us involved in the movement. And then there are, plenty of things that keep us up at night. Things that happen in the political sphere can change the way that our projects are operated or sustained. But it also increases the urgency in many other areas, climate change being one of them, some of the environmental projects that more and more, as we wonder, will we have access to this federal data, and how will we have access to that federal data? These little points of data collected by citizen scientists start to become more and more important. So we'll talk about, me, myself, and I will talk about those issues during the keynote. But we'll also start in the workshop. I think this is going to be a really exciting workshop because we'll have some collaborators there. You'll meet some of the people behind Public Lab, as I mentioned. They'll show you how to build some of these low-cost sensors. They have things like helium balloons that have cameras on them, and they're designed to be very, very obvious. So it's not scary. It's not, what is that drone collecting information on? It's a big red balloon, and everything they do is with the spirit of collaboration and openness and sense of community involved here. And so the big red balloon attracts people over to say, well, what are you doing here? Oh, we are grabbing snapshots to see really how far that oil spread in the Gulf Coast. In fact, that was how their first project got started. Where others weren't allowed, they were able to get their balloon out there, and all their images are open. They've since created some open mapping technologies to allow people to stitch together maps of things that they're finding. They have infrared cameras that they use to measure photosynthesis, to be able to look at parks or large areas and agricultural areas, give indications of what might be coming up here. You might be able to spot some problems by looking at patterns of photosynthesis not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So there's so many ways that that group is enabling communities to use low-cost tools. And they'll give a demonstration of that, and they'll have people start to build some tools there. We'll have IC Change. This is another awesome partner. And both of these two communities, by the way, have a very strong presence because their founders are from New Orleans. So we're really excited to have this whole thing take place in New Orleans where they are based, and they have strong communities too. So IC Change is a website, but it's also an app that allows people to document things that are changing in their communities and share images. I don't know if they share videos, but certainly you might be noticing change in your own backyard. Why are the hummingbirds appearing a little bit earlier than they have in the past? Why are these buds blooming earlier than they have in the past? And it's a little different than most of our other citizen science projects that we feature on SciStarter, in part because they allow for this storytelling part of it. And they allow a community to say, I think it's thumbs up, thumbs down. I'm not sure, like, well, that doesn't seem weird to me, or that's weird. What's happening? Let's have a conversation about this. They do things that are pretty cool too, because they allow people to ground truth carbon dioxide levels, and they're ground truthing against satellites that NASA has orbiting around the Earth that is measuring, getting snapshots of CO2 levels. So being able to ground truth that type of instrument by that type of data, by using instruments that are built into your phone already and start to build stories around it is very cool. So they'll give a demonstration, and hopefully we actually onboard people at the workshop to start using that application. So those are things that will happen at the workshop. It is it's designed to be very hands-on and get people onboarded there. The master class sort of takes the workshop and the keynote, and this will be designed for people who might be interested in either starting up a citizen science project with your classroom or with your community, or learning what it takes to set up a citizen science project. This is why I think it's good to be at the workshop and at the keynote as well, because you will have that back end and that context to understand, like, basically what your situation is, what your circumstances are, and what your goals are when you head into that master class, because there's so many different ways, given all the complexity that I described earlier, there's so many different ways to approach setting up a citizen science project. But what you will walk away with at the master class is a pretty good foundation, a pretty good understanding of where we know pitfalls can occur, and where there are, where there's access to free or low cost platforms, as well as some fee-based ones that will give like a little indication of the pros and cons of both of those services that exist. Understanding the scale of what you're looking for. Are you looking to set up a project just for your classroom? Are you looking for a project that's set up in your classroom, but you want to have lots of people from all over the world or some kind of geographic range weighing in and contributing to that project? And also kind of cautionary tales about the work that's involved in setting up a project, but more importantly, sustaining that project, or being very clear that this is a short-term project, because at the beginning of this, I talked about the frustration that volunteers have. They get involved in the project, they took the time to learn how to do this, they gave up watching Modern Family so they can get involved in your project. And the idea that some of these projects may come and go without any warning isn't good for the field. Yeah. The idea that the project owner just lost interest or didn't really think through the fact that it will take some work to sustain that project. These are the things that we'll go over in that master class and have discussions about as well. Framing your project so that the volunteer is able to manage those expectations appropriately.
So a lot of great themes there that you talked about. The pieces that I picked up that are broad, that all online educators, I think, could latch on to regardless of their discipline, or the ideas of opening up scholarship and opening up the research process to anybody and everybody, that you don't have to have fancy labs and equipment. You don't have to be at a place that historically has had a lot of funding in order to get started on the process of engaging in scholarly doing research. The other piece that I think is so critical that you talked about is collaboration, that we're all able to work on these pieces together and that we're working towards a common goal. It's not one single person that's ushering this through. And a lot of that collaborative spirit, again, is woven into the conference experience. So when people are attending the workshop and they're learning about folks that are doing this already, when they hear your compelling call to action in the keynote, followed up by a master class that will allow them to start working, they'll be able to build and create practice there at the conference that they can then take back to their institutions afterwards. So that's after the conference. If we were to flip the entire experience of you at the conference, what would you want people to do before they got to the conference? What kinds of questions or ideas or work would you want them to do before they arrived?
Okay, that was a great question. I would say take a little time to click around SciStarter and get involved in one or two projects, because I would love to hear from the participants at the conference their opinions on what might be lacking. Because remember, many of these projects were set up by scientists, researchers, practitioners within STEM, by and large. And some have clear educational outreach components. You will see those because you can, one way to do that is to go to the project finder and search for projects that have classroom materials. That will be an indicator to you that somebody on that team, that may actually first and foremost be an outreach and an educational project. To be perfectly frank, we do try to screen those and allow people to understand, like, this is a project to get involved in. It's great for classrooms. You may not be contributing to advancing other fields of research. It may be that they want to educate you. And we do this by making it kind of clear in the goal and the task, which we edit. Those are curated goals and tasks for every project. The goal may be for you to learn about blah, blah, blah. And we do that because, again, everything we do is about the volunteer's experience. And I don't want a person coming to the site who's really motivated to advance, research on ladybugs or something, to at the end realize, oh, they just wanted to teach me about ladybugs. I'm never doing this again. I feel like I was just baited and switched. And so with that caveat, I would say if somebody comes to the site, search for projects that are explicit for the classroom, and search for projects that do not have classroom materials as well. And the reason why I suggest that is because we see a big gap in more contextual learning. So there are opportunities that are missed just by asking somebody to do a very simple task of, I'll keep using the ladybug example. Tell us when you see ladybugs, how many spots were on that ladybug, without maybe understanding the implications of what it means when you don't see them as frequently, or you're seeing them more frequently, or why ladybugs have spots on them. That kind of broader learning about the tasks that you're doing, we see that lacking in many projects. It's not an area that we're not experts in that area for extended learning or so forth. But somebody in your group probably can look at that and say, oh, that is what an online librarian would be able to do. You set up these tags, and so when somebody goes there, it links to three online resources to learn more about this particular topic. From a digital infrastructure, we can help make that happen. But it does take a level of, it takes somebody's perspective from your community in particular to be able to look and see what those gaps are and identify potential ways to serve as a resource and do a better job of that. There's that, and there's also this aspect that I am very, very interested in, and that is figuring out a way to give some level of accreditation for these informal, sometimes formal experiences that people have here in the citizen science world. So we know millions of people are doing these projects. we don't always know what they get out of it, and we haven't really had a way, with the exception of maybe project to project. There are some examples where they'll earn digital badges and they kind of gamify a system, which is great. But given the fact that many of these people are doing things outside of their area of expertise, there are a fair number of people who don't have college degrees who are involved in these projects. Imagine what it might mean to them to be validated with a formal credit from a university or anything. Now that we're able to track it and we have these e-portfolios, so we have evidence that people are doing these projects, it's not just self-reporting out. Who can help translate that into some assessment that will allow us, this community, to place a value on those experiences and understand when that matters for a badge, a cup of coffee, you know, a free cup of coffee at Starbucks, or some level of college certification. I have seen attempts here and there because it's difficult. It's so difficult because it's like I keep getting back to, citizen science is as broad as science. And so it would be like asking, you know, somebody to come up with a way to translate and assess all forms of science. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, but there's a way to start getting at this. And we may not be the perfect system for all things, but we can probably do a decent job for half of the participants involved in these projects. Just looking at common threads that happen in the type of tasks that people do and the type of projects that they're doing. What I would not personally want to see happen is that we apply the model that we're comfortable with. So, oh, okay, they've done this, so we're going to set up this assessment by first making them watch these videos and read these PDFs and kind of fitting this into the traditional learning environment we have. So we may take, like, what does it take to get an online credit from a school like Arizona State University? I'll throw ASU under the bus because I also think that they are in the position to think differently and think very boldly and take a risk here. For an online class, you pay for it, you go through your program, you know, you have each week you're doing something else. There's a clear method of how this works in the education realm here. But I'm saying, what if you didn't start with that and you started with those experiences that people have? They're doing amazing things. They are clearly advancing research in areas. The project owner is able to articulate it. Sometimes they even cite these volunteers on peer-reviewed journals. They couldn't do their work without those volunteers being involved. So if you were to flip that model, and there's got to be people out there doing this already. In fact, I know the MacArthur Foundation and others are deep in this zone of taking life experiences and translating them in the world of digital badges. And so I'm asking, the digital badges are awesome, and that may be very helpful for career advancement for some people. What does that look like for real and formal college credits? Not just, even though certificates are important, but a real college credit. How do we set this up? So those experiences in STEM, formal and informal experiences in STEM, mostly informal, even viewed through the lens of citizen science, can be translated into something that the rest of the world places a great deal of value on, and that is, would you have a college? Did you do anything in college to get this? Well, maybe not, but I can tell you that there are citizen scientists who have done more to advance fields of research without college degrees and outside of the formal STEM environment than some who maybe have gone on to get PhDs. No offense to all my colleagues who are in another room waiting for me to get back there, but I think they would be ones to admit this too. So if some from your organization have already given thought to that, and I bet they have, I would love to figure out a way to advance conversations like that.
No, those are all really great ideas. I mean, I think, you know, I know that there's going to be people at the conference who are very involved in, you know, competency-based education. And I know that there's probably going to even be some few regulators around. And I know that keeping an eye on the Higher Education Act and what's happening with that, and kind of the whole concept of alternative providers and alternative credentialing, I think you're watching the kind of confluence of all these factors come together where some of that dream that you're talking about is probably going to be a reality in the not too distant future. And I think that's probably a really great idea in terms of if people who have these research interests, in terms of how you can both assess what the citizen scientist is doing, and then again tie it to a credential or tie it to some kind of a badging system that is probably competency based, is going to be really cool. I think that those kinds of things are definitely on the horizon, and then it would be good to be kind of at the forefront of these things.
Yeah, I'm really excited about meeting those people, learning on competency based, like just getting the lingo, but understanding the same thing. Like the SciStarter platform is very rich, it's very robust, it's got a lot behind the scenes that you wouldn't necessarily see just coming to the site. And I want to open that up, as a resource for people who want to play in our sandbox and explore these things.
I think that's exciting.
I think so too. I might be coming at you for an idea. I mean, there's opportunities for research coordination networks where we can start to prioritize meetups and formalize discussions around these things too.
I'm on board.
All right.
So Angela, do you have anything else you want to kind of talk about or say, or should we let her get on her way? I know she's been busy at a whole bunch of meetings and stuff all day, but.
Well, that was the moment where we actually shown the real lens into the making of the conference. It was these are the schedules of the people that are putting this together for you. No, I'm kidding. I really want to thank you, Darlene, for talking to us today, and let everybody know that if you want to continue this conversation with Darlene, you're going to have the opportunity to do so in New Orleans, April 5th through 7th. We invite you to register on the OLC website. I'm sure that we'll have some sort of notation next to my head in this video and YouTube. I'm going to point in every direction. I don't know where they'll put it, but some sort of notation with a link to where you can go to register. And again, we invite you to be a part of this conversation that Darlene has kicked off. This is meant to be collaborative. We're meant to create knowledge together, and we're just so honored and delighted to be able to do this with Darlene. So come on out for OLC Innovate, and let's continue to elevate our scholarship and all that we're doing for our learners.
And one thing, Angela, okay, thank you for unmuting me. I also want to thank you for putting the D in the background for Darlene and Darren back there. That was very considerate.
It was meant to be.
Nice. I'm looking forward to this. Thank you for having me.
That's going to be fun.